Hello, my name is Lee Presser. This is my show. I speak frequently to very interesting people. Some of these conversations are so exciting, so intellectually stimulating, I thought others might like to listen in. This is the reason we started recording Conversation with Lee Presser.
Welcome to Conversation with Lee Presser. Something interesting is happening in Southwestern Illinois. 3 circuit judges of the Illinois 20th Judicial Circuit have opted to resign their positions effective December 4th, 2016, and pursue a strategy of running in a partisan election which requires only a majority vote of the electorate, rather than running for retention, which requires a 60% vote. Belleville City Clerk Dallas Cook filed a complaint with the state election board challenging the judge's strategy. In January, the Illinois State Board of Election, by a 4-4 vote, allowed the judges to remain on the ballot as candidates rather than as judges seeking retention. Mr. Cook filed an appeal with the circuit court in Sangamon County. In February, an associate judge denied Mr. Cook's petition, allowing the 3 judges to stay on the ballot as candidates. The case is now being appealed to the Illinois 4th District Appellate Court. Our guest today is Steve Korris, courts reporter for the Madison-St. Clair County Record, a Metro East legal newspaper. Mr. Korris has been following this case for some time and is here today to comment on it. Steve Korris, welcome to Conversation.
Good to be here.
Well, this is an interesting, how do you do?
Yes.
So, you've been following, first of all, among reporters who are covering this case, what's their inside the ballpark feeling about all this?
Well, I don't know reporters outside of my own little group, but it's a breathtaking proposition. Only one person has ever done this, and now 3 are doing it at once. And there's a sort of amazement, and I think we were surprised that the judges got so much support from the hearing officer at the election board, the general counsel, and then from not from a circuit judge, an associate judge in a circuit court. Mm-hmm. It looked pretty plain on the surface that this wasn't supposed to happen, but now it's going to.
Well, let's start from the beginning. Where does this story start? I mean, let's explain to people the process in Illinois.
Yes.
Circuit judges are elected,
right,
in the beginning, right?
Right.
And how are they picked to even have their names on the ballot?
The first time a judge runs, it's pretty much the same as the legislators running or the executive running. You put a party label next to your name, you get the nominating petitions, you get on the primary ballot, and if you win there, you go to the general.
Okay. Now, can I run and be a circuit judge?
If you have a law degree.
So you have to be a lawyer in order to do this?
Right.
Okay.
Not a law degree, a law license.
You have to be licensed in Illinois?
Correct.
Okay.
And living in the state.
And living. All right. So not everybody can be a judge then. Only people who are lawyers living in the state. All right. And you said that you have to go through a petition process. You get from the primary to the general, and then in the general election, then whoever has the most votes wins.
That's right.
Okay. So now, how long is your term?
4 years.
4 years. And then at the end of this term?
Traditionally, you stand for retention.
Retention, not re-election.
That's right.
So you're a judge as long as the public wants to retain you.
And when you run for retention, you have no opponent, you have no party label. You run entirely on your record, and as you said, it requires 60%.
So it's either a yes or a no from the public as to shall Judge X be kept as Judge X or dismissed as a judge. That's the question on the ballot. And he or she has to have 60% or more of the people voting in the election to say, yes, keep them.
That's right.
If he doesn't, or she, doesn't, then they are no longer a judge.
That's right.
Okay.
And you start over with the process going back to the partisan vote to fill the position.
Uh-huh. But you've now, well, we'll get into that. You've created a vacancy there, and you just had the general election. So,
Right.
So you've got a, or is it the primary? At what point is the retention? Is it
in the
primary?
general? No, it's in the general election.
Okay. So you've just had your general election. So, all right. So now, when you mentioned that there was a judge who did this once before. Talk first
Right.
about that.
St. Clair County, Circuit
County.
Judge Lloyd Quito, 10 years ago, exercised this, what they're now calling an option, and he resigned and ran, and he won.
Now,
No one had ever done it before, and no one had done it since. No one objected to him doing it.
Now, when he resigned, was it effective immediately, or was it a post-dated resignation, or don't you know?
Don't know. At that time, I was strictly in Madison County and not covering St. Clair. I didn't know this had happened at the time.
All right. So now let's move up to near present. At what point did these three judges get this idea in their head to run for election rather than retention, and why would they have wanted to do that?
They made the decision in November. Maybe people had seen it coming a little before that, but their official announcement was in November.
November 2015.
Yes.
A year out from the general election.
Right, because of the time that it takes to become a candidate in the primary. So cynical people thought it was simple. They hoped they could get 50%, but they knew they couldn't get 60. That would be the obvious reason why you would do that. Chief Judge Barasevic said at the time, told the Belleville News-Democrat, that the people wanted to know about former Judge Michael Cook, and that only in an all-out, wide-open campaign could he freely discuss Michael Cook.
Yeah.
But 4 months later, he hasn't said anything about that.
Who is Michael Cook?
Michael Cook was the circuit judge who just a few days ago got out of prison for possessing heroin and using it while possessing firearms.
So he was a circuit judge in the 20th Judicial.
Correct.
The same judicial circuit that these three judges are
Right.
from. Okay.
And he was
Wasn't
arrested.
there some other judge involved in something?
It was March 10th, almost exactly 3 years ago. Associate Judge Joe Christ died on Cook family property in Pike County, Illinois, which is a sort of hunting haven. And the Cook family had a hunting lodge. And on a Saturday, on a Sunday, Judge Cook found Judge Christ dead. Mm-hmm. And in the investigation that ensued, it was determined that Cook died of cocaine poisoning. No, sorry, Christ died of cocaine poisoning. That a probation officer named James Fogarty was his supplier. That Cook was addicted to heroin, and that Sean McGilvery of Belleville was Cook's supplier. So Cook, Fogarty, and McGilvery all went to prison. Cook is out. I believe Fogarty has finished, and McGilvery is still in prison. Mm-hmm. So that was a terrific...
And this all happened in a period of 3 years.
Yes.
Okay.
The arrests came in May of 2013, and the prosecution went pretty quickly. There were guilty pleas, and everything was taken care of pretty quickly. So,
are these sentences considered normal or short, or I mean, 3 years, heroin trafficking, possession, and a judge, that seems a little hanky.
And this was all taken care of in federal court, and...
So it wasn't in the 20th Judicial?
That's right.
Okay.
The judges at federal court all recused themselves because they knew the Cook family. Well, they didn't have to say why they did. So a retired judge was brought in from Peoria, Joe McDade, and an agreement was presented to him that Cook would serve 18 months, and he refused to accept that. And Cook had already agreed to plead guilty. He did not withdraw his plea. He let the judge make his own decision, and the judge expanded it to 24 months. Whether that was lenient for the crime is a subject for discussion. Whether the prosecution was aggressive or thorough is something I doubt very strongly.
Well, I ask that question because in our country, over the last couple of years, there's been considerable discussion about how different groups of people in the country are being treated differently before the judiciary. And so that's why I asked as to whether or not this insider judge was being treated the same as if he were some young man from East St. Louis, which is right there where the federal judge, or where the federal court is located.
That's right. And Christ's death occurred in Pike County, and the sheriff up there, Paul Petty, broke the case and prepared it. And at one point, the Illinois State Police Laboratory did a test on a cocaine sniffing instrument and found more of Cook's DNA than Christ's on it, and their report identified Cook as suspect and Christ as victim. So from being a suspect in a death, Cook winds up with a rather bland little charge and a sentence that even a judge couldn't swallow.
Mm-hmm. And who was proposing this?
U.S. Attorney Stephen Wigginton reached the agreement.
I see. Didn't Wigginton used to work for the Madison County Prosecutor's Office years ago?
Years ago. And he is now retired. He retired in November.
2015.
Resigned, excuse me. And so he never really responded much to criticism of what had happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's just that this kind of thing makes people, especially those who would like to say that whites get punished less than blacks, that the well-connected get punished less than those who are not well-connected, and this just feeds right into that narrative, which is why I asked that question.
No doubt about it.
So, all right, so because there was here's a word of the day, kerfuffle, over the fact that a judge was involved with drugs and was sentenced to prison. How does this impact Judge Barasiewicz, who, by the way, has been a guest on this show and has sat in that chair before, and before that he was the county executive for the chairman of the board, I guess is what they call it in St. Clair County. So he's been in politics for a very, very long time before he became a judge. So how does all this affect him?
Shortly after all of this started, he was at a public event, and so I went there and I interviewed him afterwards on some of these questions, and he assured me that there had been a thorough investigation of everything Michael Cook had handled, and that with one exception where maybe someone got some favorable treatment, there was nothing else wrong. So then he comes back 2.5 years later and says, well, people have questions about Michael Cook and I want to answer them. Well, 2 years ago the answer was it's all beautiful.
Mm-hmm. And I believe you said a couple of minutes ago that having said that he wants to speak about that, he has yet to speak about it. And right now, today is March the 8th. Mm-hmm. This program probably seen in April. So I'm just wondering, and I know Judge Barasiewicz. I mean, he seems to me a pretty straight shooter. So I don't understand why he felt that he was in such having such a problem that he couldn't get 60% of the voters that normally don't vote anyways in a judge retention election to say, yeah, Judge, you can stay on?
He was very straightforward with me, made a very positive impression that day. I had not met him previously and walked up and asked him this tough question, and he was ready with an answer. But I don't go where he goes. Maybe when he meets people, he answers their questions, but certainly there's been no organized effort to educate the public about the sad condition that the courthouse was in 3 years ago and what's been done in the meantime.
Okay, so we've been talking about Chief Judge Barrett.
Yes, that's right.
But there's three. So who are the other two?
Robert Hayda and Judge Lachine.
Hayda's a circuit, and Lachine is
what
an
they call
associate. Or no, he's a resident.
A resident judge, which means that if he stood for retention, voters in 5 counties would be able to cast a vote, but he will be on the ballot only in St. Clair. So one of his advantages in this is to restrict what would have been a 5-county vote and squeeze it down to 1, his own county.
I see. And that was Lachine you were talking about.
Yeah.
Okay, and then Robert Hayda?
Yes.
What is his concern about running for retention versus just running in a straight 50-50 election?
That's a mystery to me too. In fact, Hayda threw out 2 murder convictions that had been obtained in Cook's court when the defendants came back and said that was an improper conviction because the judge at my trial was a heroin addict. And Hayda, over the objections of State's Attorney Kelly, granted new trials. One person then plea bargained, one person got a new trial and exonerated himself on a self-defense motive. So I was very proud of Hayda for saying this judge's condition deprived people of justice. So
this judge had actually been using while on the bench. In other words, he was under the influence of drugs at a time when he was hearing cases.
Absolutely, and transcripts never quite capture everything that's going on, but transcripts alone show his impairment with the benefit of hindsight.
And now, I know this is hearsay. Here we are in court, hearsay evidence, but did anybody recognize as this was going on and look the other way in terms of Judge Cook that you've determined?
And Christ had been a prosecutor. He was a brand new associate judge. In fact, the night he died was sort of a party for a new judge. Could you be a cocaine user in a prosecutor's office and no one have any trace of suspicion? I thought that executives today were trained to be very alert for that sort of thing.
Okay. Do they do drug testing of prosecutors, judges, or have they added that since this whole Chris thing went down?
They adopted a drug testing policy, but they exempted office holders. Elected officials have the option of being tested or not, and we haven't followed up to see whether they have.
So the circuit judges are all office holders. Are associate judges? I mean, they're appointees of the circuit.
I don't know what their status would be on that.
And so Brendan Kelly, who is the prosecutor in St. Clair County, he's exempt, but his staff would not necessarily be.
Right.
Very interesting. So, all right. So we've now changed the judiciary from being outside of politics, and it's now been put inside politics. Is that, at least in the 20th Judicial? Is that?
Well, and if they succeed with this, retention is basically done? Why would you stand for retention when you've got this option? Now, the 1970 Constitution, the convention, collided on this matter of how do we pick judges, and states still do that. In Missouri, it's all done away from the voters. It's in the hands of experts, and there's reasons not to do that.
Lawyers again.
Yeah. So the great compromise that was forged was we can have one partisan election, but after that, there is no more partisan activity for a judge. After that, only retention, only nonpartisan, and in fact, once a judge puts on the robe, he or she may never go political again. That's the part of their ethics, and yet here we have judges with robes running a political campaign. And also the Constitutional Convention thought, should retention be 50%? And again, the compromise was no, 60. We need to know that the people are strongly behind this judge.
They called it 3/5, right? Not 60%. You're referring to, let's see, it's Article 6, Section 12. Yeah, Section 12, where the word may rather than shall in terms of retention. And I've learned that shall means you have to, and may is optional. So is this why the State Board of Election voted the way that it did? Is this why this associate judge in the Sangamon County voted the way, or not voted, decided the way that he did, and therefore the appellate court will probably find the same because of may versus shall?
May. It says, if you want to be retained, you may go get these papers and fill them out. Cook's lawyer is saying you may apply for retention, or you may go home.
Not Cook. You said Cook.
Yes. Dallas Cook.
I'm sorry. Dallas. Right, there's two Cooks. There's the judge,
objector,
the
Dallas
former
Cook,
judge, and then Cook, Dallas Cook, the
Right.
Belleville city
His
clerk.
lawyers are saying that may means you don't have to run for retention. You don't have to stand for retention.
Right.
You may, but that has been turned now into not an option between retention or retirement, but an option between retention or election.
Right. Now, I know when I read this that it said that once you resign, the office is vacated.
Yes.
Okay. So that comes down to this kind of post-dated resignation, because you're saying that the announcement was made in November of 2016 that they resigned for November 2015 for resignation in December of 2016. So in other words, it's almost like a post-dated check, 13 months post-dated.
And their argument is this is exactly what the Constitutional Convention intended. Really? A 13-month?
Yeah, where you resign, but you still maintain your office for another 13 months. I thought when you resigned, you resigned. Or if you resigned, it's like a matter of weeks. Normally, it's a matter of, well, I'm resigning effective next month, or the first of, or something, or the last day of. That's normally how resignations run, not 13 months from now, I'm resigning.
And while Lachine gets this bonus of not running in the outer counties, Haida and Barasevic switched positions. I'm going to run for your position, you're going to run for mine. And no one understands that.
What I don't understand. I thought circuit judge is a circuit judge.
They
What is,
are running for different vacancies.
oh, I see.
Each is running for the other. And at the Board of Elections, somebody said, why did they do that? And their lawyer said, oh.
We got about 5 minutes
right.
left here. So we've covered this one pretty well. I want to just take this last 5 minutes to talk about something that we've talked about in a previous visit by you, which was the case of Fred Bathon, who had been the treasurer of Madison County, and then he got caught in a scheme where having to do with the selling of tax
Delinquent taxes.
Thank you, delinquent taxes, and wound up in prison.
Right.
From what I've heard, from what I've read, that he is has been released from prison early,
Yes.
based upon a recommendation from Steve Wigington, the guy
Right.
you just mentioned, who
Yes.
was the U.S. attorney that used to work in Madison County, and Judge Herndon, the federal judge in East St. Louis. He signed off on this also. Is that
Yes,
right?
That's right.
Is there any reason that has been given as to why, I mean, Fred Bathon's not Fred Madoff, I get that, but nevertheless, he was accused of something that was very distasteful.
No, the Wigington's motion for early release is sealed. Herndon's order granting it is sealed. The only way that we knew that it had happened was that his Bathon's release date changed on the Bureau of Prisons inmate locator. By the way, you can find any prison in any federal penitentiary and get their release date and find out where they are. So all of a sudden, his sentence was cut in half, and he is now free.
What was his original sentence?
30 months, I'm pretty sure.
And he served
15 or 17.
But he didn't just walk the streets after that. He was sent to a halfway house.
Well, and that was part of his time. No, he did wind up at a halfway house, but now he's free. He's under court supervision for a certain time.
Parole.
But he's free.
Parole?
No, they call it supervision. I suppose it might be similar to, I don't know, probation. Yeah. So, and Wigington never asked for restitution from him or the others. A couple other people went to prison in this scheme, and Wigington did not try to get these people paid back. And these are people who were in jeopardy of losing their homes. And we made matters worse for them. We, the taxpayers, through our elected representatives, made matters worse for them. And some people lost their houses, and some people suffered greatly through this. And Wigington could have sought restitution, but chose not to. They're trying to get it now through civil litigation.
Right. There's some sort of a case in which the Madison County itself is being sued, and I don't know enough about it to really comment on it. And we're there. We'll have to do a follow up on this in the not too distant future. I will just make a comment before we come to the very end. Usually, in cases where people are released early from prison, they have given names and other people have gone to jail, and that hasn't happened here, has it?
No.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being with us.
My pleasure.
And to the audience, I've been speaking with Steve Korris. He is a reporter for the Madison and St. Clair County Record. It's a legal newspaper in Metro East, St. Louis area. We've been discussing the case of 3 circuit judges from the 20th Judicial in Belleville. This is going to be uploaded to YouTube, so show it to your friends. Thanks. See you next time.